Hello everyone, thank you again for joining me. I know it's a quick turnaround from my last video, but I was made privy to some really interesting information from a very good friend of mine, Don from Shell Harbour Motors, and it's got to do with one of the discussion topics that we've taken a look at, and it was the one on contaminated water. And I get it, there's so many other news items that probably may be of more importance to people and of higher priority. As we can see, the horrible news and the devastation coming out of the Middle East and, in Ukraine and in Russia and all around the world. But something a little bit closer to home. This issue concerning contaminated water. This information that was presented to me had me scratching my head in disbelief. Just bear with me. I'm going to do my very best to be as concise as I can. Now, in December of 2018, that's a good solid, 6 years ago, down towards the south coast of New South Wales, a place called Jervis Bay. There's a Jervis Bay Range facility and HMAS Creswell. HMAS Creswell it's a Navy base. It's been around since 1958. And Jervis Bay is about 180 kilometres south of Sydney. Now, the New South Wales Environmental Protection Authority, they released this fact sheet in December of 2018. And it's an update for the local residents of that area, of the Jervis Bay area. And what was it about? The PFAS investigations. So obviously something was found in the water. The key points. It's a 2-page fact sheet. What are the key points? The Department of Defence is investigating potential PFAS contamination stemming from the historical use of liquid firefighting foams at the Jervis Bay Range facility and HMAS Creswell. The New South Wales PFAS Task Force has determined no precautionary dietary advice is required at this time for the consumption of seafood from that particular area. And this is 2018. And it goes on, this 2-page fact sheet. Subheadings: what are PFAS levels? PFAS, is it a health risk? It says here, the Australian Government's PFAS Expert Health Panel, in its report to the Federal Minister for Health, noted there is no current evidence to suggest an increase in overall health risk related to PFAS exposure. This is in that area. Here's the kicker. However, the expert panel also said health effects cannot be ruled out at this time. And it goes on. Why is testing being undertaken at HMAS Creswell? Who is managing the investigations in and around Jervis Bay? What is known so far? Investigations have found PFAS in surface water, groundwater, and biota taken from those particular areas. And biota is animal and plant life. So these particular areas around the Jervis Bay, and the areas were Summer Cloud, Mary and Flat Rock Creeks and Captain's Lagoon. I'm not very familiar with those areas, but there's all these waterways there. Do residents need to do anything? Finding PFAS in the environment does not mean there is a human health risk. It is important to assess if there are exposure pathways through which people might ingest PFAS, such as drinking contaminated groundwater or consuming food products watered with contaminated groundwater. And it goes on to say, regardless of PFAS detections, New South Wales Health recommends that people do not use groundwater for drinking, cooking and personal hygiene, that is including brushing teeth and bathing, without testing and appropriate treatment. Don't you put your trust in the authorities to have all that already done for you, where you don't have to go and test it? But anyway, it goes on. Can I still eat the seafood from Jervis Bay? It's very clear here. The New South Wales PFAS Task Force has determined no precautionary dietary advice is required at this time. So consuming seafood is A-OK. Remember, December 2018, this is a fact sheet from the New South Wales Environmental Protection Authority. What are the next steps? It just goes to say that the Department of Defence and the Department of Infrastructure, Regional Development and Cities continues its investigation into whether there are any potential impacts for the local community. Now, why was this fact sheet circulated in this particular area? Why was there an update for the local residents? Well, the reason for that occurring was because, now this item is from NITV, and it stated, and so this is the reason why the New South Wales Environmental Protection Authority released this fact sheet. It was because also in the same month, December of 2018, this article appeared. And please, I hope you allow me to read through this. It's titled, "Give Us Answers. Wreck Bay residents call for PFAS blood testing." Now, Wreck Bay is within that Jervis Bay precinct. Residents of the small Aboriginal community on the New South Wales South Coast are calling for the government provide blood tests to check if community members are at risk of PFAS contamination. Residents of a small Aboriginal community on New South Wales South Coast say they are afraid they've been contaminated by toxic firefighting foam from a nearby naval base. The people of Wreck Bay, who were not included in a parliamentary inquiry into PFAS contamination, are now urging for blood tests to check if community members are at risk. Now, I have really no idea why they were not included in a parliamentary inquiry. So that Aboriginal community, or those people of that particular area, they weren't included. I don't understand why. It goes on. It says, "Why can't they go back and recommend that we have blood tests?" says long-time Wreck Bay resident Jack Hampton. "It has been revealed chemicals from the harmful foam used at the nearby Jervis Bay Range facility have leached into waterways through the small community and the nearby Jervis Bay village within the Budori National Park for decades." So this is not something that's just, arrived. It's in the fact sheet. There was a section there that it said that the contaminants, this PFAS contaminants, are emerging. Well, they've been around for decades. Anyway, PFAS, which stands for, as we already know, is used in firefighting foam and has contaminated a land around 26 defence bases across the country. So this Jervis Bay isn't an isolated area here. Mr. Hampton is an Aboriginal elder and a former firefighter with the Jervis Bay Brigade. He and fellow elder Jimmy Williams would regularly use the toxic foam to put out fires in the area. He goes on and says, we would go up to the Jervis Bay Range facility and we'd be using the foam all the time, especially putting out oil fires. We would go into a superstructure, a ship for example, and we'd be crawling through there with the smoke, and you'd have a mask on, and when you come out they would have to hose you down and would be soaking wet. Elder and fellow Wreck Bay resident Jimmy Williams suffers from liver and prostate cancer and has nodules in his throat that require regular medical attention, all of which he believes is linked to exposure to PFAS chemicals. During a community walk session, Mr. Williams requested the government blood test him to determine if PFAS has contaminated his body. He says, "Here I am, a living specimen. Take my body, test it, see what's in it." Free blood tests have been provided to other affected communities in New South Wales, Queensland and the Northern Territory. No such offer has been afforded to the Jervis Bay and Wreck Bay villages. You have to ask yourself the question, why? "I'm a typical example of what could happen if there is something in PFAS," Mr. Williams said. His son, Jason Williams, believes his father's condition is no coincidence. "I believe it's got to do a lot with PFAS, why he's got 3 different cancers. It's got to be something more than just coincidence and bad luck," he said. "When you look at our community, we've got a lot of cancers, blood disorders, deformities from women before their children were even born, stillborn babies. And the government is saying, no, this PFAS doesn't have any effect on the human body. People just want to know the proper answers. In January of 2017, the Department of Defence launched an investigation to determine whether soil and groundwater at the Jervis Bay Range facility was contaminated with chemicals. The results of the department's interim report, released on Wednesday, this article's in 2018, revealed contamination in seafood at a number of sites across the national park, including the now closed Mary Creek, a main source of fish for Wreck Bay residents. Didn't I read that in the fact sheet a couple of minutes ago, that it was also found in, animal and plant life, and yet the New South Wales, the Environmental Protection Authority said everything was A-OK, no precautionary dietary advice. Remember what we said last time, ladies and gentlemen, that say one thing and it doesn't match with the other. We used that word before, disconnect. Darren Sturgeon, a Wreck Bay resident, said no signs from the department were provided to residents and tourists alike, and instead was instructed to put up signage by the Department of Infrastructure, Regional Development and Cities. He and many other residents feel they've been left in the dark about the risks. The community is very, very concerned about it, he said. They're not getting the right answers. People just want to know proper answers and not scientific answers from people who aren't scientists. They're just rehearsed. Jack Hampton says residents have received little to no health advice from the department. We've never had any advice from the Defence Department. The only advice we've had is that they'll be doing some drilling for the PFAS and see where it's contaminated. It's just unbelievable for the government to hold back all of this information. And it goes on, and it says, James Williams claims the government had long known about the contaminated sites and only put signs up 2 weeks ago. He says the department's warnings have come too late. I'm watching my father die, he said. It's hard to watch him fade away like that. He was an active man, always fishing. Now he's lucky to make it to the backyard. For Jimmy Williams, he hopes his small community is treated the same way as others across the country. Treat us the same way as all these other places. We should be included in any inquiry into the effects of PFAS. A full report of the department's investigation expected to be handed down in the first quarter of next year. Now, this is going back 2017, 2018. And here we are in 2024. And as we've encountered already through articles in the Sydney Morning Herald, only last month, that PFAS levels are being detected in our drinking water across the city. Now, in response to that, this is from the National Indigenous Times. This was in 2023. So 4 years later, Indigenous communities impacted by the contamination of firefighting chemicals on their ancestral lands have marked a huge victory in court. So what was happening in Jervis Bay, and the article that I just read, and the people who were involved, and all the sickness that was occurring, through a class action settlement with the federal government, a sum of $22 million has been secured. During a recent federal court hearing, the details of the settlement were made public. The affected individuals were receiving millions of dollars. The Wreck Bay Aboriginal community initiated the class action on behalf of those residing near the HMAS Creswell and the Jervis Bay Range facility, along with those who use the land traditional and cultural practices. The group who represented the plaintiffs, who were the community down there, were Shine Lawyers. The focus on the case brought by the Wreck Bay community was to seek damages related to the use of the land. Get this, earlier that month, in 2023, the Commonwealth settled a separate class action with the landowners near 7 different RAAF bases to the tune of $132.7 million. So there was compensation handed out to the residents of Wreck Bay, $22 million, and now across the country to the tune of $132.7 million. There was compensation handed out to other landowners. Which sort of then begs the question, what about you and I? So these Aboriginal communities have been offered compensation because they were getting sick. They did their investigations and they found out that the drinking water was contaminated, plant life was contaminated, the animals, the fish were contaminated. The only reason why a court would hand down such a victory is because they found something in the water. And it wasn't that it was emerging, it's been around for ages. Now that we have found that we've got drinking water that's contaminated and holds levels of PFAS, are you and I going to get compensated? I think I mentioned it in my last video. Why are we paying Sydney Water while this is occurring? It's a lot of questions, isn't there? Just scratch your head and you think, and when this information was presented, and I hope I did a good job to make it as clear as possible. So to sum up, this Aboriginal community and Aboriginal communities around this country that were close to these, Navy bases and RAAF bases, this PFAS contamination was occurring all around the country, and the government has settled with these compensation claims and provided these Aboriginal communities with a victory because they found that water was contaminated or the waterways were contaminated. What about you and I? Like I said, do we go for a class action? I don't know. It's a really interesting scenario, isn't it? And I've spent a little bit of time on this, and I do thank you for sticking around, but the information was just mind-boggling, jaw-dropping, to be quite honest with you. Until we meet again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much again for your support. And another quick reminder, please turn up Saturday, 10 o'clock, outside Town Hall in response to the government's draconian Misinformation and Disinformation Bill 2024. We need to stop it, and and the only way we can stop it is through coming together, making our voices heard. Until then, be good, do good. God bless.